Jæja, góðu gestir. Ég ætla að biðja alla að koma inn í sal sem eru frammi. Við ætlum að fara að byrja þetta. Ég býð ykkur öll hjartalega velkomin á 4. morgunfund sem er haldinn af Vinnueftirlitinu og landlæknis Embættinu og VIRK. Ég heiti Gunnhildur Gísladóttir og ég kem til með að stjórna fundinum hérna í dag. Og það er bara mjög ánægjulegt að sjá hvað eru margir mættir og vonandi margir líka sem eru að horfa á okkur í streymi. Nú, dagskráin okkar í dag, hún er ekki að verri endanum. Við erum svo ljónheppin að Endurmenntun Háskóla Íslands hefur stutt okkur í að fá frábæran fyrirlesara, Ilona Boniwell, og við þökkum þeim kærlega fyrir það. Nú, eins og margir hérna inni vita og hafa kannski verið að fylgjast með, þá hafa VIRK og landlæknis Embættið og Vinnueftirliti verið að vinna að því að gefa út Heilsueflandi viðmið fyrir vinnustaði. Og hingað er komin Stína eða Sigríður Kristín Hrafnkelsdóttir og hún ætlar að segja okkur aðeins frá því verkefni. Gjörið þið svo vel.
Takk Gunnhildur. Ég ætla að finna... Já, ég vil langar að byrja því að þakka Endurmenntun Háskóla Íslands og Dóru Guðrúnu sviðsstjóra hjá Embætti landlæknis og námsstjóra yfir náminu í jákvæðri sálfræði fyrir að hjálpa okkur við þessa tengingu. Við höfum verið að vinna að stóru verkefni til að hjálpa vinnustöðum að verða heilsueflandi. Og ég ætla aðeins að segja ykkur frá því bæði hvernig okkur gengur og hvert við erum komin og hvað höfum verið að gera. Þeir sem hafa verið að fylgjast með okkur undanfarið vita nokkuð við höfum verið að vinna að viðmiðum heilsueflingu á vinnustöðum. Ég þreytist nú seint að segja frá því hvað heilsuefling er og því mér finnst að við þurfum alltaf að byrja því að minna okkur á það. Það er þetta ferli sem gerir fólki kleift að hafa aukin áhrif á heilsu sína og bæta hana. Og við erum þá með þessum viðmiðum að reyna að skapa þetta umhverfi og aðstæður sem auka heilbrigði og veljan alls starfsfólks, það eru bæði stjórnendur og starfsmenn, og koma í veg fyrir andlega, líkamlega og félagslega vanlíðan. Og við þurfum líka alltaf að minnast á það að heilsuefling er sameiginlegt verkefni starfsmanna og stjórnenda. Þetta er ekki bara á herðum stjórnenda og þetta er ekki bara á herðum starfsmanna. Þannig að þetta er sameiginlegt verkefni. Enda snýst þetta á endanum í hvernig samfélagi við viljum búa í. Grunnurinn eru þá viðmiðin sem eru í takt við viðmið Embættis landlæknis heilsueflandi leik-, grunn- og framhaldsskóla og heilsueflandi samfélög sem embættið hefur unnið að síðustu 10 árum. Og þau byggja í grunninn líka á heimsmarkmiðum Sameinuðu þjóðanna og á rannsóknum og líka á erlendu fyrirmyndum. Þegar við hófum þessa vinnu fyrir rúma ári síðan, að þá byrjuðum við á því að skoða alla þessa þætti, alla þessa rannsóknir og erlenda fyrirmyndir og annað að svona leiðbeiningum. Og við lítum á þetta sem þetta sé svona leiðavísir að heildrænni nálgun til þess að bæta heilsu og auka veljan starfsfólks. Mér langar aðeins að útskýra viðmiðin. Við erum með einhverja 8 lista sem að snúa að mismunandi þáttum. Það eru til dæmis þáttur öryggi, hann er bæði líkamlegt öryggi og andlegt öryggi. Það er þáttur vellíðan og þá snýr hann að svona geðræktar hlutum og svo framvegis. Þannig að ég ætla ekki að fara að telja til hverjir eru allir en svona aðeins að reyna að útskýra hvernig verkefni lítur út. Þegar að vinnustaðarnir fá aðgengi að þessum listum og fara að svara þeim, þá eru spurningar sem snúa þá eins og til dæmis að hreyfingu sem dæmi. Þá eru spurningar á 5 kvarða skala sem að þú svarar í raun og veru. Til dæmis getum tekið dæmi er til staðar samgöngusamningur. Því samgöngusamningur styður við vistvænar ferðavenjur. Og ef samgöngusamningur er ekki til staðar, þá myndi viðkomandi svara á bara skalanum 1, ekki komið til framkvæmda. Hann getur svo hins vegar unnið sig átt í 5 sem er þá komið til framkvæmda og eitthvað staðar á leiðinni þegar að vera að skoða og vinna í því sem getur alveg tekið eitthvað tíma því við gerum okkur ráð fyrir því að gerist ekkert allt með því að smella fingri. Þá getur á leiðinni verið kannski merkt við númer 3 er verið að vinna að því. þannig að það ekki alveg komið til framkvæmda en það verið að vinna að því. Og þegar að það búið að svara öllum spurningalistunum, bara hreinskilnislega, því við erum ekki í keppni við neitt, við erum bara með okkur við okkur sjálf, við erum að horfa á framfarir hjá okkur sjálfum og þegar að það búið að svara hreinskilnislega þá farið í það að skoða leiðir til að bæta starfið, því við erum bara miðað við það að bæta okkur. Nú það sem við höfum líka gert að á undanförnum árum hjá Embætti landlæknis að koma upp svæði sem heitir heilsueflandi.is. Þar liggja þessi gátlistar inni og þar eru líka í raun og veru viðmiðin eða gátlistarnir fyrir leik-, grunn- og framhaldsskóla, en hver í raun og veru, að því það eru mismunandi spurningar og eðli listana þá eftir starfseminni, að þá á í raun og veru eiga vinnustaðir bara sitt vinnusvæði þar inni. Hvert fyrirtæki eða vinnustaður fær svo bara sinn aðgang og svarar fyrir sig og að vinna í sínum málum. Við tókum að því við erum búin að vinna nú að þessum viðmiðum í rúmt ár núna. Við vorum með síðast svona heimskaffifund þar sem að komu að hér það bil 70 manns og rýndu í listana með okkur. Við höfum tekið tillit til þeirra athugasemda en erum ennþá með listana í frekari rýni og við auglýstum eftir vinnustaði í tilraunaverkefni og það sóttu það bil 60 fyrirtæki að taka þátt í tilraunaverkefninu og við erum afskaplega þakklát fyrir allar þær umsóknir. En við þurftum að velja og það var afskaplega erfitt. Þetta eru verkefnin sem að þetta eru fyrirtækin og vinnustaðirnir sem að munu fara af stað með okkur núna í lok febrúar í að svara gátlistanum, hreinskilnislega fyrir sig, hvar eru við stödd, skoða hvaða skref viljum við taka með okkar vinnustað, hvað viljum við gera næst og pröfa svona áfram vinnuna fyrir okkur öll hin. Þá þurfið þið ekki að labba á veggina heldur, þeir sem að taka þátt í tilraunaverkefninu munu hjálpa okkur að leiðrétta og laga það sem að var ekki fyrirsjáanlegt. En mig langar að þakka fyrir að fá að deila þessu með okkur og þakka Ilonu fyrir að koma og vera með okkur í dag. En ég ætla að hætta hér og Ilona næst. Þið getið skrifað mér að það eitthvað sem ykkur langar að vita meira verkefnið. Takk fyrir.
Já, takk fyrir þetta, Sigursteina. Við munum halda áfram að leyfa ykkur að fylgjast með þessari áhugaverðu vinnu okkar. Nú þá komið aðalfyrirlesaranum okkar sem búin að vera bakhjarl og gestakennari í diplómanáminu í jákvæðri sálfræði hjá Endurmenntun Háskólans frá upphafi. Hún í dag með vinnustofu klukkan 1 í Dunhaganum og ég hvet ykkur til þess að skoða það og skrá ykkur. Now, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, who is going to talk to us about positive organizational practices for healthy and resilient workplaces. Known for her positivity and motivational attitude, I have no doubt that Ilona is going to inspire us all with this interesting subject. She is one of the European leaders in positive psychology, having founded and headed the first master degree in applied positive psychology in Europe at the University of East London. Her main teaching expertise lies in the areas of positive psychology and positive psychology coaching, with research interests around subjective time use, time perspective, eudaimonic well-being, and application of positive psychology to businesses, executive coaching, and education. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ilona Boniwell.
Just 1 second to prepare. Mic. Thank you. Hello, everybody, can you hear me from here? Yes? No? Okay, I'm going to get the mic. I'm not very good in standing here, I have to admit. I'll try, so I probably will move around. Hello, is it better? Excellent. It's lovely to be here, I would say, on this, I don't know, sunny morning. It doesn't exactly work this way. So I have to get used in Iceland to getting up in the dark, finishing working in the dark. I think you are very, very, very courageous and resilient people because you are kind of managing to do it every day. Like so many people in the dark at 8 o'clock in the morning. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. So let's talk, let's spend a bit of time, sounded like 45 minutes, but maybe a bit more actually, to talk about organizations, about healthy, resilient, engaged organizations, and what we can potentially do to get there. Of course, if there was one magical solution, that would be great. There isn't, which is why we are going to talk about the multitude of possible solutions and the importance also of adjusting the solutions to the current organizational reality. So just a couple of words. I'm coming from the positive psychology background. I'm a positive psychologist who spent the past 20 years now working on positive psychology. So it did all look really, really shiny to begin with. And afterwards, the road became a bit more tricky and nevertheless still very exciting. So I'm still on this road, still on this journey, like many of us here. How many people are here from the positive psychology diploma? Oh my God, quite a lot. Endor, of course. I mean, you are from the positive, you are the positive psychology diploma. So obviously many of you are on the same journey and still going strong. So just to present myself very quickly, I have kind of several hats on, and most of these hats are quite valuable personally for me and hopefully a little bit for others. So there is an academic hat. I'm an academic in positive psychology. There is also a teacher hat, teacher trainer hat. I do an awful lot of teaching and training and flying around the world and talking to people in different ways and forms. And there is another hat which I really like personally. It's kind of, I don't know, you have to guess it, but some sort of creator, inventor hat. So I've been doing quite a lot of development of tools and tests and basically trying to bring something tangible into positive psychology and to make sure it actually has a tangible impact on others. That's really my passion, is how to make it practicable, how to make it, workable. And as part of the consultant hat, we've been working with quite a lot of different organizations, lots of exciting adventures as well. So today we'll be talking about organizations, which is why a little organizational slide. Organizations that are changing, of course. Most of you here, in the world of work, you will be very familiar with the fact that the world of work has changed hugely in the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's going to continue changing, even more so. Obviously, differences and major age differences, millennials arriving to the workplace, major demographic difference in terms of aging population and actually keeping aging population active, major technological changes, major, obviously, commercial changes and financial market changes, not talking about political changes as well, just to have a look at China and the States. That's quite interesting, right? So very often it's summarized, all of those changes are summarized in this acronym of VUCA. You all heard about it, right? VUCA? No? Yes? No, yes? If you haven't, it's a good acronym. It's not bad. If you read Harvard Business Review, you'll find it kind of on every second page, more or less. It's basically an acronym to summarize the current complexity, volatility, ambiguity, and uncertainty of the current changes in the business world, in the world of work. Really nice, a bit scary VUCA. Sounds kind of exciting. It doesn't have a huge research base behind it as an acronym in itself. However, it's kind of nice and convenient to remember. So anyway, talking about all these changes and just continue a little bit, some of the major challenges currently faced by most business organizations are retention of talent, turnover in talent retention, and most Western organizations are confronted by that, with very different rates of turnover in different countries, of course. Nevertheless, the fight and the war for talent, that seems to be one of the biggest current issues. And the second biggest issue, perhaps, is really the issue of mental health problems, well-being, anxiety, depression. The fact that depression currently affects about a quarter of the population in the globality, not at any given time, but over the course of their lifetimes. And that's going to change, that's going to continue growing at least current trends indicate that this number is growing. And specifically, this number is growing where? It's growing in the younger age group. So if we are looking at the differences between the millennials, for example, between people who are currently young, around 20 years of age approximately, and the old generation, there are lots and lots of myths about the big fundamental generational differences. Yet when we look at the literature, there is only one really, really strong, consistent difference that actually emerges over and above the so-called just basically cohort effects. And this one big difference that is very, very stable is actually the difference in mental health sensitivity and the higher depression rates affecting younger people. So it's a very, very consistent difference and something to really look out for. So chances are mental health difficulties continue to be an issue, especially so for the younger age group. This is why this is one of the things that we need to be prepared for. And recently, that's a little anecdote, talked to Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology, and we had this chat, and I said, okay, what do you regret? And I said, actually, the only thing I do regret is that despite all huge investments into the resilience and training younger people to be more resilient and actually less sensitive to depression and anxiety, these numbers continue rising. And I do regret, because we haven't yet managed to reverse this process. So this is something to really take into account. And of course, and it's a bit of sort of more funny data, I guess, who to blame? Not that we are going to spend the whole 1 hour blaming somebody, of course not. And of course, this is not to suggest that the managers are to blame. Nevertheless, when you're actually looking and questioning the employees voluntarily leaving their jobs, they blame the manager. So when you're looking at the employees who are leaving and asking why are you leaving, the main number one figure is the manager. Great, right? Who is the manager here? Quite a few. There you go. There you go. Remember your responsibility. And of course, as we know, how do we become managers? We usually become managers not because particularly that we are fantastic at managing people. Hopefully we are. But that's not the given. Usually we become managers because we're actually good at something and actually quite good performers ourselves, right? And so it doesn't mean that we are all born with a whole fantastic array of management skills and we know exactly what to do when we're actually faced with a group of people, because the task is not exactly the same as getting yourself to work hard in comparison to getting other people to perform consistently, etc. So there is this wonderful model. You probably know it. It's quite an old model now. It's called Competing Values Framework. Have you heard about it? Yes? There are kind of two nods. It's quite an old model. It's been around for, 20, 30 years? Developed originally by Cameron and Quinn. It's one of the, probably one of the most established managerial models explaining actually the contradictions managers and leaders find themselves in. Basically, why? Because in order for the organization to flourish and succeed, that's why it's called competing values, all of these values of all these outcomes actually have to be achieved. At the same time, we have to face the outer world, right, external world, and in order to face the external world, we need to be competitive. So there is the whole market competitivity. In order to do that, we actually have to make sure things are done fast, efficiently, etc. In addition, we have to make sure that we are creating something of value over and above the competitors again. So there is a whole creating and doing things first pressure that any manager, any leader would actually find themselves under. So doing things fast, doing things first is extremely important. At the same time, there is this absolutely essential internal, inward orientation. So these are the red and yellow quadrants. The orientation towards basically hierarchy. So we need to make sure things are under control and things are going right. And there are processes and procedures in place to make sure things are turning in the right direction and well on the inside. And at the same time, we have to take care of others. Now that's your whole yellow part. Collaborating, doing things together, making sure the team is working. So actually no pressure. Because if you look at that, these things are actually contradictory. Because in order to collaborate, sometimes you need to forget about doing things fast. And in order to create, you need to make sure that you're not controlling people too much. And in order to control and make sure things are under control, you actually sometimes need to go a little bit of creativity and freedom and autonomy and things like that. So actually there is an inherent contradiction in place. And so there you go, there is your manager, you know, kind of going in all these directions at the same time. And are we all good in all different multiple functions? Can we assure that we actually can hold all these different functions productively in place at any given time? Or do we have preferences? Of course we do, by the way. So, I do love this model, I must admit, and I think this model is actually the base of one of the major positive psychology models that I'm going to talk about towards the end of this presentation. So, what are our choices? In a sense, we can talk about two basic major approaches to transformation, and one of the really, really classical basic ones is basically the so-called deficit approach, understanding and figuring out what's not working, why is it not working, and basically the best manager, the best leader is a person who is great at problem solving. That's a traditional approach. The more or less abundance approach or positive approach that we can talk about is the exact opposite. Is instead of focusing on what's not working, we are focusing on what's working. Why there are teams that are consistently exceeding expectations. What's working right in our organization? What are we most proud of? What are the major successes? How did we make sure to achieve these successes? And from this perspective, basically, the manager is no longer a problem solver. The manager, the leader, is a creator. So it's kind of turning the whole problem upside down, and this is really the essence of positive psychology at work, and also appreciative inquiry at work, which are both very complementary approaches. So the question is, how do we move from this deficit perspective to the thriving perspective? Thriving where people are friends at work, even though sometimes it sounds a bit weird. It depends on the culture, very much so. Resilient, optimistic, energized, and we can actually sustain this positive momentum. So this is the objective, I would say, of positive organizational psychology, is to bring us closer toward thriving on a daily basis. Of course, taking into account that organizations are complex, very, very complex structures and complex systems that need to be taken care of. There are two major questions, I would say, in bringing positive organizations around. There are two major outcome variables we talk about in positive psychology. One of these outcome variables is actually well-being, the importance of well-being in the workplace. Is it important? A quick question to you. Is it important for you that your workplace feels well? Yes? Feels well on a daily basis? Okay. Great. Why is it important? Why is it important people feel well? For everything? Okay. What well-being gives us, actually? Creativity, thank you. What else? Motivation. What is the main outcomes of well-being at work? Engagement, yes, they are a little bit related, yeah, of course, as well. It's a contributor too. So what well-being in the workplace gives us, of course, by the way. Well-being is everywhere nowadays, mainly yellow, all around the place, etc., etc. So what it does give us, and this very classical study, I'm not going to mention it, but actually what it does give us is, first of all, health. We do know that people who are well are also people who are the healthiest ones, and actually can resist viruses, can resist exposure to basically viruses, etc. So people who are well are also healthier, they take less days off, and from this perspective, they do perform better. Of course, well-being also contributes to creativity. Thank you. There is a very big association between well-being and creativity. If we want creative people in this yellow quadrant out there, if we want actually, not yellow, it was green, right? If we want people to create, to think out of the box, to find new solutions, we really need them to be well. It also is associated with greater acuity, mental acuity as well. So, of course, there are really good reasons for us to invest in well-being. However, when it comes to the well-being performance argument, the situation is a little bit trickier. Because if you look at the literature, there are lots and lots of reviews saying, is basically happiness contributing to the performance in the workplace? And there are some of those reviews and meta-reviews and meta-analysis saying yes. There are other ones saying no. There are other ones saying uncertain. So the actual picture, the relationship between well-being and performance, it seems to be, it is definitely there. It is definitely there, but it is not the whole answer. There is something missing. Well-being on its own, just focusing on well-being, is not really sufficient to fully predict productivity and performance, because at the end of the day, what we are looking for is a performing workplace, not people who are just well and going back home at 5 o'clock in the evening and forgetting anything about work, right? We do need a performing workplace. So basically, yes, there is definitely a link between well-being and productivity and performance, but it does not explain all of the productivity and performance. There is another major variable that we must take into account, and most literature takes into account now, which is the variable of engagement. So when we talk about healthy and well and performing workplaces, there are two variables to look at. One is well-being, another one is engagement. What is engagement? Engagement is basically being fully there. Being fully there when you're at work, you are fully at work, you're bringing your whole self to work, you're really engaging with what you are doing, being responsible, putting the energy in, etc., as opposed to disengagement where work is out there and I'm here. So when you look at the literature, and sorry, a bit of tables starting here, when you look at the literature, actually there is a very, very consistent predictive capacity of engagement with regard to lots and lots of performance outcomes. When we are looking in the literature, you'll find that engagement predicts better return on investment, increase overall in operating income, lower levels of sickness absence, advocacy of organization is a good place to work, which is very, very important for talent retention, of course, and talent attraction, customer satisfaction, loyalty, productivity overall, turnover, impact, beliefs, etc. So engagement is one of those really essential things to look at when we are looking overall at functioning, thriving workplaces. And there is definitely a very consistent line saying well-being is essential. To make it a little bit more complicated, sorry, I'll just take it off for a while. How do we actually bring the two together? What we are looking at is well-being plus engagement as major, major outcomes in order to predict profitability and work performance. There's a really wonderful picture. So it's actually a very scientifically based report, but it's a wonderful picture that I really, really like, summarizing the different sort of influence of well-being engagement in the workplace. So this particular, not a graph, but a picture, comes from a white paper, Engage for Success, prepared for the British government in 2014, and actually captures the situation rather well. So what do we have? We have well-being here as an X, and we have engagement here as an X. Both axes are important. Both axes are important in combination. What we're ideally looking for are those healthy, basically well and engaged workplaces, well and engaged employees, here in the top corner. These are the most productive and healthy employees, people who are well, looking after themselves, have enough time to recover, and also have capacity to invest themselves fully into work. Engagement on its own and well-being on its own are actually a little bit deficient. Because when we're talking about high engagement without well-being, what do we have? We actually have burnout. Not straight away, by the way. It takes a couple of years. It takes a few years to get there. However, when we are just looking at engagement without well-being, there is no possibility of sustainable engagement, because sooner or later, these people are actually going to step out. So engagement is essential, but not on its own. When we are looking at well-being, and by the way, that's the usual situation when you're facing a business leader and start talking about well-being, some of them say, yeah, absolutely, what we need is well-being in the workplace. And others look at you and saying, well-being? Yeah, no, of course it's nice, yeah, nice to have, but that's not what I'm looking for. Why not? Because sometimes, kind of in the absence of arguments or scientific understanding, what a business leader would imagine as well-being is actually that. People who are well, they come to work, they have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, they chat with one another, they enjoy their time, they go back home at exactly the hour because they have other things to do, they're fine, they're well. the organization is not progressing. So actually, well-being in the extreme, well-being for well-being's sake, without the engagement, is not great. Which is why I usually actually pull this little sort of picture out and say, yeah, you are right. If it's just well-being, that's not what we are looking for. It is definitely not what we are looking for. What we are looking is a combination of the two. And obviously, nobody wants to be here. So I think that's not exactly the argument. So, have I convinced you that we are looking for well-being and engagement, approximately? Okay. And the question is, how? There we're actually coming to practices. What do we actually do in order to increase well-being and engagement in the workplace, in order to create those healthy, resilient, productive organizations in the long time? What do we do to create this sustainable engagement? Of course, the carrot nowadays is not exactly the issue, right? Because we know from research in general that, yes, if we are paying more for very basic, sort of straightforward manual tasks, paying more equates to better outcomes. However, when it actually comes to complex processes, creativity, decision-making, managerial performance, etc., carrot unfortunately doesn't work. Yet, this is where most systems are still based on. Less governmental systems, more private systems. There is still profound belief that the better the carrot, the juicier it is, the more outcome we are going to get. Unfortunately, it does not coincide at all with the scientific literature. So more or less, I mean, I hope we are on the same wavelengths approximately here, but from what we know, carrot is not definitely the answer. Carrot has to be there, obviously, sufficient amount of things to eat from this perspective. We have to pay sufficiently well so people can actually enjoy a good quality of life, but more of benefits and more of straightforward payments is actually not going to produce a huge difference. So what is? So another table to scare you, and afterwards going to be just pictures. So what do we actually do? What are the variables that we need to affect in order to increase well-being and engagement? And actually, again, if you look around the literature and you compare different systems and models and different so-called predictor variables or antecedents of workplace engagement and well-being, you actually find quite a lot of different variables arising. So I would like to say there is one answer. There isn't one answer. There are actually a lot of different variables that would influence positive outcomes. So some of the models, some of the sort of very well-established models like Deci and Ryan and intrinsic motivation and auto-determination theory would highlight sort of three major variables like autonomy, mastery, relationships. Some more complex organizational models would actually highlight a lot more. Some, for example, from Robertson and Cooper highlight a lot more of those variables that could actually affect. We try to actually work with all these antecedents and comprise them into a single model. We have identified a bit more, so we're looking about 15 to 18 major predictor variables to predict basically engagement and well-being in the workplace. So these predictor variables range from personal variables like physical energy, resilience or cognitive flexibility, emotional stability, agility, time competence, confidence or positive mindset, to, I would say, more organizational or environmental variables, such as pay and benefits, and especially the perception that these pay and benefits are actually fair in comparison to the marketplace. So the fairness is a really important part. Trust climate, managerial support, environmental condition, social importance or mission. Then you have also so-called job experience factors, like autonomy, mastery, variety, structure, and relationships. So when we are thinking about what do we actually do, we need to sort of take into account what actually needs to be impacted on. What particular variables perhaps are our strengths in the workplace and what are our weaknesses. We have found, I mean, lots of research before us as well, and we have found now in 3 different samples, French, English-speaking, and also a very large Arab sample, then all these variables have unique importance in predicting engagement and well-being in various degree, of course. Some of them perhaps are a little bit more important than others. So for example, what we find is physical energy is actually a really physical energy or vitality is a very important predictor. So sometimes almost the #1 predictor of engagement. And this is something, for example, we forget. We think that perhaps what we need to talk about is meaning, which is also the case, by the way, because meaning or social importance, mission, personal meaning, and also meaning of one's job is another very important predictor variable. Nevertheless, physical energy is something that we forget. And yet, it is so important. What can we do then to increase physical energy? What can we do to increase vitality? And there are actually multiple solutions. It can be something as simple as letting people go for a walk, that we just talked about with somebody here. Yeah, thank you. We did. So it can be as simple as to encourage walking meetings. When you need to meet with your manager, you don't always need to make notes. So sometimes you can walk and talk. So it's very simple. It's just having some sort of access to the gym easily, very easily, so people during the lunch break, during 30 minutes, can actually come in and do a little bit of physical exercise and have a shower. Shower is a really important condition in accessing a little gym room, for example. So these are not major solutions. These are not impossible things. It's actually simple ingredients that would increase physical energy, not mentioning just the availability of a space to sleep. Because we know, and there's lots and lots of research from NASA especially, that actually something like a 20-minute sleep during the workday really increases one's physical energy. So we're talking about relatively simple solutions that many organizations can implement. So this is kind of a good starting point to start thinking about it. What are the possible solutions to put into place? What are the possible practices that are not hugely complicated, but just need to be thought about in order, so for example, to increase physical energy or climate of trust or managerial support, etc. So I'm going to mention some of them, and of course, some of them is just a selection, because if we actually really start looking at the all available literature, and not only literature, but also organizational examples, what we'll find is probably hundreds of these possible workplace practices. Not all of them, by the way, have been examined in a similar consistent manner by research yet. So when we talk about positive psychology interventions, for example, you'll find that there are lots and lots of meta-analysis bringing together research findings on the efficacy of, for example, gratitude interventions like writing down 3 good things that happened to you today, or mindfulness and meditation. So there's lots of research out there bringing together conclusions. Meta-analysis usually is a really good starting point. When we look at the organizational literature, the situation is not yet quite as straightforward. So what I mean is that there are actually there is only one meta-analysis out there on positive organizational practices, and this meta-analysis by Donaldson that came out this year. There is another quite a comprehensive review from Salanova et al. In 2013, which is not a meta-review yet, but actually picks up on quite a lot of these organizational practices. So that's another kind of area to look up, and another article to really sort of examine. So Salanova is one of the top organizational psychologists in Spain, doing actually a lot of research on these practices. And if not, there are lots of sort of pieces of evidence there and then. So there is evidence for walking meetings. There is evidence for incentives to sleep. There is sort of evidence on having sort of 20-30 minutes per day sort of free time to interact with other colleagues. There are spots of evidence that are not necessarily yet pulled together on comprehensive review. So you have to do a bit of sort of digging at the moment. So it's kind of like digging work or climbing a big ladder in order to identify them. I think we're at the stage of where we need to keep working on identification in order to be able to test all of these interventions kind of in a more global way. Again, another word of caution is that mainly these interventions have small to medium impact, mainly small. Again, what it means is that we can impact well-being engagement, but a little bit. So it's kind of the methodology of small steps. It's not that one intervention is going to turn things around. I've been recently talking to a head of an investment bank in Switzerland, and he was really hoping that I'm going to say, just do this one thing, and everything will be better. And he's like, are you sure there is no? No, there isn't. No one, no? Okay, 5 things, no. Sorry, no 5 either. It's like, okay, we just have to keep doing a little bit of lots of little, yeah. From everything we know so far, yeah. There are some major ones, but there is no one magic pill. There is no one magic solution yet. Maybe we'll discover it. Maybe you will discover it, right? You are the pioneers of changing the workplace. So with all of the things in mind, no magic pill, no one solution, multiple solution, small impact rather than large impact. And of course, there is one more word of warning, is habituation. We already have, we know from the research in 1930s, that actually people react positively to attention being given to them. There are studies in the 1930s that have experimented with lots of different practices to improve well-being of factory workers. And what they did, they sort of first turned the lights up, so basically people in the factory could actually see each other better. They had positive impact. Then what they did later, they actually turned the lights down. They had positive impact. Then they increased the temperature. They had positive impact. Then they decreased the temperature. They had positive impact. Great, right? So the conclusion was like, oops, yes, what people do react to is attention given to them. It's not necessarily one solution that is durable. It's attention, is taken care of, is actually investment into their overall well-being and engagement, and we do have the habituation stepping in as well. So again, some of these practices would probably have temporary impact. Nevertheless, as there are actually lots of things to do, let's think out of the box and keep moving. So that's another sort of word of warning. By the way, beautifully summarized by Buckingham in his latest book called Nine Lies of Work, something like this. Very approximately, look me up. I recently read it and already forgot the title. Well, anyway, let's look through the examples of what we could possibly do, for example. And of course, actually, one of the big examples, and I think we know all of it, and that consistently comes through in the literature, is actually listening. Is very simply being listened to, training managers and leaders in listening skills, and actually just allowing the listening space to happen and to take place. Another example is actually having your say. So in order to increase and improve climate of trust, what's really very important is that people have a feeling that they can discuss things. They can actually talk directly to the top management, raise their issues, raise their concerns, raise their doubts, etc., to be able basically to voice things out. These are really fundamental conditions for establishing a climate of trust. Other examples is basically any type of open communication, like the open book finance. Training people also sometimes to read the financial information and to comprehend financial information. Another example, I really like this one. It's actually quite specific, very, I would say, sector specific as well. Things like ego management is shifting from I to we, and actually shifting the language, and sometimes very often working on the language to encourage more collective thinking and collective responsibility. So I remember that's just an anecdote when I was young, when I kind of had my first position at the University of East London. That's not exactly the same example, but a bit similar. There was a really weird thing happening. As I started as a young sort of employee, young lecturer, one colleague warned me, saying, just actually, there are some weird things going on here. They're a bit different. They're quite good, but they're a bit different. I said, what do you mean? It's like, just be attentive, because you'll see there are some rules at the university here. It's like, okay. And so I go to the induction day, and one of the first rules is presented. And the rule is, we cannot say the university. What do you mean? I mean, I work at the university. Why can't we say the university? No, we are not allowed to say the university. If you do, you have to put £1 in a piggy bank. Okay, but what can I say? We can say our university. That's not bad. Why? Because the university is something out there. And our university is us. Everybody is the part of the university. So there is no structure. There is no something out there, something is here, and you are part of that structure. That actually was my first experience of an amazing, inspirational leader, who, by the way, did come to this induction day. And as he said hello to everybody, he said, hello, Marina, hello, Charles, hello, Ilona. You just look at him saying, how do you know my name? That principal, his principal, and that was a university at the time of about 3,000 employees, 25,000 students. The principle was to learn every name before coming to every induction. And any time you could see the vice chancellor in the corridor somewhere, he would say hello with the first name. That was his basic principle. Okay, I'm not encouraging you all to do that, but by the way, it feels good. On the receiving end, it feels amazing. So anyway, shifting the language from I to we, from thee to our. It's actually one of those small, very small, impactful strategies as well that actually can make a difference. Everything about welcoming mistakes. We know from the literature on the mindset how important it is to develop flexible mindset in order to perceive yourself as capable of growing, of changing, of developing, almost the base for organizational change, because very often we know there are lots and lots and lots of thousands of papers on resistance to change, how difficult it is to change organizations because it is difficult to change a mindset. These are some really useful practices actually to develop more flexible mindset. Welcoming mistakes. There are many, many organizations doing it nowadays. It's one example here. Another example is Air France, for example. They have a very consistent strategy to really talk about and bring up all the mistakes. Mistakes are welcome. Mistakes is where we learn from. Is what we can actually, it's how we can get better. If there are no mistakes, we cannot progress. So mistakes are welcome. Or another really nice one, by the way, use sometimes management and leadership training programs. I would recommend you, if you are doing one of those programs, it's actually very, very creative and impactful practice, is things like failure CV. So write down your CV with everything that ever went wrong. Really good idea, by the way. Have you done it? Nobody? I really recommend. It's a great, great strategy. Look at it from upside down. And what have you learned from everything that went wrong? So it's not about self-criticizing, by the way. It's about learning. So all strategies around respecting choices. Respecting choices in a large way, in terms of choices. How do you devise your working day? How do you devise your working week? Where do you work from home? When do you actually work from the office? So anything to enhance autonomy, but also in a very, very simple way, like personalizing one's working space or little decorating budget. And this is actually a very small strategy, but can have a big impact. And I'm talking here more from the experience. I have sometimes spent days, virtually days, being stuck on this strategy. For example, when training an executive team from a large organization who would come to the strategy and say, we do exactly the opposite. Because we have this color scheme in our organization, and we have this requirement to keep everything absolutely the same everywhere, and all our desks have to be completely clean all the time, and nothing can appear, and we are only allowed to have one photo of the family. So, what's wrong with one photo of the family? Actually, yes, it looks pretty. It looks nice, it looks consistent, it doesn't look messy. At the same time, what's happening is that actually our sense of belonging is undermined. If you look at the literature, there is actually a lot of new literature that has come up on creating good working spaces. And a lot of this literature contradicts what the workspaces are currently doing, I would say. So, for example, for years we believed that open space is great for collaboration, right? Wrong. Open space is wrong for collaboration. In the open space, people write more emails to one another. In the open space, people are much more apprehensive about talking to their neighbor in order not to disturb other people. In the open space, actually, the even though we can talk to people easily, the depth of the interaction is much more shallow. So, in fact, in all this research in workspaces, depersonalization of the workplace at the same time actually can lead to disengagement from the workplace. And more or less, if you look at the current literature, the sort of very quick, in a sense, solution here is really a combination of the open workspace and private places with full accessibility for people to actually have private workplace when they need to in order to be able to isolate themselves. And of course, having some more open places in order to collaborate with others. Another indication from the literature is actually the personalization of the workplace is important. It's important to have my little corner of the world here for me, which actually kind of doesn't belong to me, but I can feel at home here. So some of the sort of indices from this perspective. We also know, I keep talking. We also know that there is a lot of research currently on gratitude practices in the workplace. So gratitude from different direction, gratitude as customers thanking the employee, and actually there is really good research around it. So actually the impact of the employee being thanked by a real customer is much greater than being thanked by a manager, for example. And there are also lots of studies on the gratitude expressed by the employees as well, to them, to the other people, to the managers, etc. So lots and lots of it actually, when we look at the meta-analysis, gratitude practices, different types of gratitude practices, actually very consistently leading to higher well-being. So other examples, and that's one of my favorites of interventions in the workplace, takes a bit of organizing to begin with, but actually it's a really effective methodology as well. This particular practice is around encouraging the reciprocity. So it sounds a bit complicated. I'm going to start here. It's okay, I will come back. I promise. So the idea of sort of generalized reciprocity is that actually in any given group of people, people can help each other. People can help one another relatively easily. Most of the time, people don't help one another because they don't know what another person needs help with. So this particular practice is actually, just to explain it simply, is centered around the fact that in any group of people, each person expresses some needs or something that they would like to have help with. So let's say we have a group of 20, 25 people, let's say a department, a small department, or a team. It works quite effectively between 6 to 30 people, but it can actually be much larger. It can go to up to 100 to 200 people. And each person says, I would like to have help with, and explains 3 things where they would like to be helped in one way or another. These things can be of personal or professional manner. So it can be, I'm looking for a particular report. I know like 5 years ago we already started working on a document, but I can't find that document anywhere. Or I know there was already a team of people who started thinking about it, but I don't actually know who this team of people were. So what do I need help with? Maybe it's information, maybe it's actually particular already result, something I need really to find out. It can also be of something of personal nature. Let's say I'm looking for a piano teacher for my son. Anybody knows a good one, okay? So it can be a mix of personal and professional. And what we do, you need to draw a big circle. It can be on the wall, it can be on the floor, by the way. It can be quite big. Each person expresses their current needs on 3 little post-its and puts them down next to a dot with their name on the wall, on the floor. And as we go around, other people just note. They just write down if there is anything they can do to help. Again, they can offer advice, they can offer help, they can offer some direct connection between people. What is amazing is that actually as we listen to these needs, usually people would have an answer, a suggestion or help for maybe about a third or half of these needs. They don't need to help everybody, they can just help somebody. And they write it down in little post-its. Then there is a bit of time for people to complete their post-its and actually put their propositions of help on the post-it of the person asking for that help. And then when they do that, they actually draw the line So this is why you have the spider web. They draw the line between their name and the recipient's name. And then you just need a bit of time for people to mingle together over a cup of coffee and actually find one another and talk. This type of practice is actually very easy to implement. All you need is an hour. Is for a smallish team, an hour. For a large team, maybe 2 hours. So it doesn't take much time. What it actually produces is a very strong impact on a sense of relatedness, climate of trust overall, and this overall feeling that actually there's so many nice people around. My God, I never imagined that so many people would like to help me. So that's another practice to try out. Easy, it's not complicated, you don't need to be a psychologist to do that. Just try it out. And you don't even need to be a manager. Okay, and that's sort of how it looks like in terms of who will help whom. Okay, moving on a little bit. What is also important is, of course, recognition, delivering feedback, and especially delivering positive feedback. Again, when we look at the literature, people, managers who deliver positive feedback actually end up with employees who are far more engaged. And by the way, I hope you know all of it, right? The feedback sandwich doesn't work anymore. Do you know it? No? Yes? Who has heard about it? Okay, not all of you yet. So we all are very familiar with this feedback sandwich. It's like, say something good, now say something bad, and say something good again. There are great scientific articles saying not effective any longer. Why? Because all we think about is the bread, you know? First of all, think about the bread as just being the bread and nothing serious. So we actually, first of all, ignore the good information presented in the burger, and we really focus on the negative information presented in the meat. And because the impact of the negative information is far stronger than positive information, actually the positive impact of the positive information becomes irrelevant. We know that it is just in order to get the burger through, to get the meat through, basically. In addition to that, it's actually a practice that has suffered from its wide recognition. So one of the reasons this feedback sandwich methodology is no longer effective is because people know it. Is when the manager is starting to give the feedback, people go, yeah, I know what's coming. I know exactly what's coming. So the impact of this practice is negative thanks to the fact that we actually embrace it so widely. So feedback sandwich, not very effective. It is much more effective to separate positive and negative feedback in time. And of course, to deliver the positive and negative feedback as quickly as possible, rather than waiting for a couple of months for the annual review. And of course, lots of little other micro actions, by the way, that are effective, encouraging social relationships like lunch together, eye contact, winning responses, being authentic, likes. There are lots of sort of technology solutions nowadays, actually, where colleagues can like each other, etc. So lots of different sort of micro actions as well can be implemented. And now the last kind of, not the last, one of the last heavy slides, because it looks a bit complicated for you to take a picture, and I'll explain it in simple, comprehensible terms. So that's a practice, personal management interview, actually originally coming from Kim Cameron, so the big guru of positive organizational scholarship. Guru, I mean, he looks like a guru a little bit, but he's lovely. So, for real. So basically, this practice he actually examined quite a lot and presents usually a lot of data on its efficiency and efficacy as well. So practice is actually very simple. It doesn't need to be called personal management interview. It's just really having personal time with each of the people a manager is directly responsible for. Ideally, every couple of weeks. If every couple of weeks is too complicated, every month will do as well. Something between 15 minutes and 45 minutes per person. What is different about this practice is that during this meeting, it is the employee who actually is responsible for the plan and for the discussion. So it is not the manager's agenda, it is the employee's agenda that's being discussed. it is ideal, in the ideal scenario, that in order to introduce this practice, we first have the pre-meeting. The pre-meeting is kind of the first setup meeting that we have some time. It takes actually quite a long time to begin with, an hour, 1.5 hours, to establish kind of the framework for this each particular interaction with a employee. What it means, we kind of sit down and say, okay, we'll try to meet, we'll meet every 2 weeks, every month. During this meeting, you are responsible for the agenda. However, let's now talk about what is the most important points on the agenda that we'll probably cover every time. So what is important for us to cover? And then, of course, there will be variations as well. So it's kind of, there is this pre-agenda is established in this initial meeting. And afterwards, the meeting's actually quite straightforward. They're around this pre-established agenda that can also change, of course, depending on what the employee actually needs right now. What's different is employee is responsible for the agenda, and the other second difference is we talk about professional and personal matters. So we don't wait until the end of the year, for example, during the annual review, when we talk about what are your main goals and aspirations, how can you achieve them. We don't wait for that. If somebody wants to engage in a learning program somewhere, if somebody wants to go away for a course, if somebody needs a little bit time or readjust their time because their child is sort of ill, etc., this can be decided straight away. So employees can bring up all the personal and professional aspirations during the same meeting if necessary. And kind of from a personal experience and from experience of clients who have actually put this practice changes almost everything. What it means is that when people look at it, they first go, no way, I'm responsible for 14 people. I'm not going to find 14 hours every month to actually bring this up. It's just impossible. I have too many responsibilities, it's too much time. Okay, one solution is, first of all, not every 2 weeks, perhaps every month, perhaps not 1 hour, perhaps more like 30 minutes, etc. You think about it, how to integrate it. But when it's done, what we usually will find is actually a huge gain of time. And it sounds counterintuitive. You think, no, I spent like a day and a half in these meetings. But actually, we lose this time, and at the same time, we gain far more because lots of problems never arise, because actions are actually much faster, because we don't lose time anymore in bigger meetings where everybody talks and nobody does anything. So actually, there is a huge gain in productivity for everybody. And at the same time, there is really this proximity that's established between the manager and the employee as well. So it's one of the most beneficial practices with one little word of warning. So when Cameron presents his data, usually there is, and again, I have lived through it, so I can be sort of an example. We do know that overall performance, engagement, well-being really rise when this practice is introduced. However, if this practice is then withdrawn, and let's say somebody becomes too busy and forgets to do it for a while, there is a really strong negative impact. So if you do it, don't stop it. That's why I'm saying I'm an example. With my own employees, I have, knowing that I shouldn't. At one point, I felt so busy, tired, everything, that I kind of stopped it for about 5-6 months. I had the negative outcomes consistently to the research. Like, okay, I wish research was not always right, but in my case it was. I really had the negative outcomes resulting because this proximity, climate of trust, this psychological safety seemed to be really affected as well. Anyway, so that's one of the really major practices. Again, you still alive, by the way? Did I talk too fast? Okay, good. Okay, great. Thank you. So another group of practices really concerns the strengths and the integration of strengths in the workplace in different ways and forms. We'll discuss these different ways and forms in a minute. So everybody knows what we mean by strengths, right? Strengths? Strengths? Who doesn't know? Okay, everybody knows, great. Lots of definitions, whether you subscribe to the perspective of or the strengths profile perspective. There are lots of kind of measurement tools, etc., but just overall, basically, strengths is what we are good at, very performing, have the energy when we use them, and actually use them relatively often. So kind of major points: performance, energy use, something we are good at, particularly good at, derive energy from, and use relatively frequently. That would be one of the definitions, more coming from the Alex Lindy perspective. So many strengths out there, ranging from kind of 24 in the strengths in the VIRK classification to up to 60 in the strengths profile classification. These are just examples of some of them. So some of the kind of very straightforward practices in the workplace, really, really straightforward ones, and we'll talk about further ones, would be, for example, to do something like strengths gym. Strengths gym is very, very simple. It's basically getting a group of people together, ideally a group of people working together, and getting this group of people to, first of all, recognize and nominate their strengths themselves, thanks to the questionnaires, thanks to strengths cards, whatever, and actually they'll nominate strengths and recognize strengths in one another. Can be done in small groups. You're going to laugh now. Can be done in large groups. that's women training 150 Emirati cheap happiness officers. I like this picture. People get surprised. So it can be done in large groups, etc. Of course, very nice, interesting, engaging exercise in general in order to boost positive energy. However, of course, in order for this exercise to be effective in a working team, we have to go actually quite a lot further. So, and I'll talk about that in a minute. In order for this exercise to be effective, is not just to recognize our strengths, is actually to become aware of our strengths to such an extent that the tasks in a team start being distributed in accordance to the strengths of the team members. So it's not just about the recognition, it's about putting them in practice. So this is just one exercise demonstrating how strengths can be integrated in the workplace. And now I'm going to go through a bit more complicated model to explain or to suggest some other possible avenues. So what you see in front of you is probably something that you can recognize. The kind of the circle itself is sort of so-called the employer lifecycle. So what we usually see is basically stages of employer life in an organization: attraction, selection, onboarding, development, retention, and even separation. And in our sort of worldview of strengths, we usually know that strengths are those positive resources. Yet when it comes to workplace, there is usually questions of how actually do we translate it to the workplace. And so what we try to do, we try to map out this translation or implementation of strengths during these different stages of the employer life cycle. Just to give an example, when we are attracting or selecting, strengths can really play a very big role in both attraction and selection process. So, for example, what can be done is to do, first of all, so-called job strengths analysis. Is people who are very successful in this job, previous people who are successful in this job, what strengths do they actually have? So we can analyze it from a strengths perspective. Because when you take a particular job, it's not that each job is associated with a very specific subset of strengths, but each job in a different context can actually have a specific strengths subset which are particularly important. When we recruit, when they actually advertise, we can really bring that information up. So what are exactly the strengths we are looking for? And the research actually shows on strengths that recruitment for strengths is actually more efficient than recruitment based simply on experience. So just because somebody worked in a call center for the past 10 years of their lives doesn't mean they don't necessarily have the major strengths necessary for this context. The strengths we are looking for is perhaps capacity to listen and really very, very good listening capacities, or basically loving to talk on the phone. There are some people who love talking on the phone more than others. And actually, recruiting for the strengths and not necessarily just for experience results in much lower turnover based on real organizational studies. So it's bringing the strengths up. Do you love talking on the phone? Do you spend hours on the phone with your friends? Do you love listening? Do people come to you for listening? So bringing them up in the recruitment campaign. So then afterwards, of course, we can have strengths assessment. we can have strengths interviewing. What is strengths interviewing? Strengths interviewing is actually looking for the signs of strengths during the interview process. Because when people talk about their strengths, they have certain behaviors associated with it. They usually can talk about their strengths quite a lot. They'll give various examples. They'll be very articulative. That intonation and tone of voice basically will change. So we can actually look for the signs of strengths. And one of the really good interviewing questions for strengths is like, okay, give me an example. So you're saying your strength is leadership. Give me an example, good example of leadership. Okay, great. We listen, saying, can you give me another example? Can you give me another example? When we are talking about our strengths, we will be able to give multiple examples. When we are talking simply about our skills or competencies, not necessarily strengths, the examples will be far more limited. It will be more difficult to think of another example. So the ease of examples is actually one of the characteristics that we're looking for when interviewing for strengths. When people join in, onboarding, joining in, basically one of the really good practices is really strengths introductions, introducing people to one another, saying, okay, we have a team of 7. Can we each introduce ourselves with the best strengths? That really starts the process on a very positive note, for example. Also, by the way, it's not here, it's actually a good idea, and there is good research evidence for so-called slow onboarding, by the way. Slow onboarding is giving people a lot of time to meet lots of new people, by the way. So we can do this strengths introduction sort of specifically in a group of 2, 3, another person next day, etc., not necessarily everybody at the same time. So when we are looking for development, for example, strengths gym and team complementarity and being aware, clearly aware of the areas of strengths is a really good starting point. And then really not just leaving it here, but sometimes, for example, doing something called strengths canvas, actually putting the strengths of one another on the wall. So when new projects are coming in, we can actually look at them and say, who is the best person for that? Whose strengths would correspond the best, etc. So job crafting is again another technique, another practice that has very substantial evidence-based, has been picked up in the recent meta-analysis. Job crafting is basically an individual process that ensures that the people's strengths correspond in the best possible way to their job tasks. And also the meaning people find in job tasks, again, corresponds in the best possible way to the range of their functions. So job crafting, this is a process which is sort of more coaching-based, I would say, or training-based, requires to be a little bit accompanied, but nevertheless something that managers can learn quite easily to help their employees to actually find this sort of thin articulation between their best strengths and their current job tasks. Strengths-based annual review is actually putting a few questions on strengths in the annual review. Do you feel that your strengths were very well used during this year? In which tasks did you use your strengths the most? Are there any strengths you feel you're not using fully in your current position? 3, 4 questions, that's all it needs. It's not complicated, doesn't require changes of any established process. It is actually just integrating them into the annual review. Strengths training for team leaders. Again, research demonstrates that if we train team leaders, managers to recognize, to spot strengths, to talk the strengths language, to be aware of the array of strengths, then they are much more able to match, basically, to create the job crafting as they go along. In order to actually be effective in retention, again, professional review, job crafting are very effective strategies, or, for example, positive 360. Positive 360 or reflected best self, which is basically one of the talent development processes where a person who is identified potentially as a talent also has their strengths recognition coming from other people. By the way, I'm sure many of you would have heard about normal 360, right? Something perhaps you are using or you have used. There is actually quite a lot of critique in the literature now about the efficiency of the 360. It's not yet decisive, but there is critique. critique is based on the fact that we actually, when we engage in a normal 360 process, there may be some negative outcomes because people ignore the positive information and can be sometimes disproportionately affected by the negative information. When we are talking about the positive 360, this critique doesn't apply, because what we are looking for is the recognition of somebody's potential from the others, and then working with this person to integrate the themes and the strengths that have been nominated by others in comparison with their own self-nomination, and actually working on the development of this potential. So it's again very, very, very nice process. And even when people are leaving, even when we are separating, the strengths conversations can also take place. So something like positive dialogues is actually appreciating the strengths the person has brought to the organization, even if they're leaving, or reorienting them, saying, how can you make sure that these strengths that you have are going to be exercised even better or further in the next workplace? So having those positive conversations, again, that means that we end up with very good alumni. Even people who left still are engaged in our organization in one way or another. So these are just some examples. Does it give you an idea that actually there are quite a few things to do when it comes to strengths? And again, looking back to the literature, strengths intervention in the workplace have been picked up in a recent meta-analysis as one of the most sort of effective interventions overall. Oof. I'm getting to the last topic, to the last chapter. And the last chapter is on positive leadership. Positive leadership. Of course, when it comes to leadership, one thing which is a bit tricky sometimes, there are so many different types of leadership around, right? What leadership have you heard of? There is authentic leadership, there is, go on, sorry? Strengths-based leadership, what else? Mindful leadership, thank you. Come on, keep going. What other leadership? Transformational leadership. Anything else? Appreciative leadership, thank you. What else? In fact, lots of them. Lots and lots, and everybody tries to coin their name. In a sense, it probably doesn't matter because we're actually talking broadly of the same thing, is how do we motivate others, not using the carrot and stick, but actually using resources and positive resources like gratitude, trust, or relationship, etc., in order to enhance performance. So we are probably talking about, so I'm not married to the name of positive leadership or any particular other ones, more on the sort of going in a general direction. However, what we do know, like positive in the broad sense leadership, basically there are some sort of major characteristics. These are people who are more open to emotions, welcome emotion, view leadership as a more balanced phenomenon, rather than you have to behave in a certain way. They can actually have leaders who are quite different from one another. It's not about all being the same. Working with what we've got, celebrating diversity, because we actually know that diversity in the workplace really enhances overall functioning, rather than selecting all for the same criteria, asking questions, working through relationships, using micro moments efficiently, encouraging positivity, altruism, looking after themselves, by the way, it's very important. So, of course, when we talk about positive leadership, there is this sometimes like, oh, yes, okay, yeah, we are flying with the fairies type of phenomenon. Okay, we're sort of losing connection with the reality. Yes, it's all very, very positive, but how do you stay so positive when, I don't know, the volcano erupts, for example, or when, I mean, you know that much better, right? Or when our industry is being affected by recession disproportionately, or when new technologies developed in China are threatening to kind of kill us within a year, etc., etc. So it's all great to be very positive. There is a reality of life. How do we actually combine the reality of life with being positive? And I did really personally struggle with this question for quite a few years, because obviously I'm very much in favor, coming from positive psychology, of positive leadership, but at the same time there is kind of grounding reality question that did bother me. And one day, and that was kind of my revelation, I bumped into a model. And then you will see it in a minute. It's very simple. It actually looks very complicated, but it's simply drawn. But that model changed my life personally and changed the representation of positive leadership for many, many people I actually talk to or consult or train. Okay, there is the model. It's my favorite model from positive psychology. So the model comes from Robert Quinn. So Bob Quinn is actually one of the people who created the competing values framework to begin with, kind of 30 years back. And actually what you see in front of you is loosely based on the competing values framework. And what he's saying, it requires a bit of explanation, by the way, to make sense of it. What he's saying is actually that in order to practice positive leadership, leaders actually need to be, first of all, bilingual. What does it mean, bilingual? They kind of need to combine the language of tradition, which is like getting things done fast, well, making sure everything is working, with the language of modernity, being warm and open to people, developing creativity, developing autonomy. So if you, first of all, if you kind of draw the line here, horizontally, you'll see that these behaviors in the inner circle correspond to actually traditional behaviors, and these leadership behaviors correspond to more modern behaviors, okay? So that's the first point, that in order to be effective, it's not about throwing the baby with the bathwater, because actually we need as much to make sure things are working well and controlling them and making sure it's okay as developing people. So that's one. Two, actually, all of these behaviors, traditional or modern, can be taken to extreme. And when they're taken to extreme, they become negative. So the negative is not traditional is negative, traditional is bad, modern is good. Negative is when any particular positive behavior, productive behavior is taken to extreme. So what you have here is actually traditional behaviors taken to extreme become something quite uncomfortable. So let's say cost control, which is essential in any organization, taken to extreme becomes austerity. Role clarity is being very clear who is doing what, who is responsible for what, actually becomes micromanagement, and nobody usually likes micromanagement. Procedural compliance, having procedures in place, becomes bureaucracy. Make sense? Decisive action, which we do need to do as when we are leaders to actually decide and make decisions, actually becomes exclusion, because I decide against the will of everybody without consulting. So it is the extremes of these positive behaviors that are actually becoming complicated and difficult to deal with. But what is more interesting is that positive behaviors can also be taken to extreme. Because it's easy to imagine traditional ones, the bureaucracy, what we usually complain, too much hierarchy, too much paperwork, too much control, not enough space to breathe. We are familiar with that. What we usually don't complain about is too much freedom, too much creativity, too much, okay. Yet, so it's unusual to complain about it. Yet, actually, it is the case that we can take so-called modern positive behaviors to the extreme as well. Because creativity, when it's too much creativity, it becomes chaos. Intrinsic innovation, motivations like do what you want becomes blind intensity. You do what you want, so you do what you want 24 hours a day, and at some point you kind of drop off dead. Authentic relationships, because we like each other and we establish good and meaningful relationship, actually becomes permissiveness, because yes, of course I understand what's going on in your life. Yes, I understand. I did understand yesterday, I understand today, I will understand tomorrow. And so, and unfortunately then, you have very special conditions with regard to everybody else. So, or even group deliberation becomes indecisiveness, because we keep talking, we understand each other really well, we really keep talking, and it's a really good discussion, but we just don't decide anything. And we just go around in circles. So, in fact, this really changed my view on leadership, because it is not about the ancient and modern. It is really about what is the best from the modern, I would say, style, and what is the best from the traditional style, and how do we combine them in the best possible way. So, by the way, the third kind of way of reading this diagram is to apply the 4 quadrants that I actually showed in the beginning to this circle. So here you'll find the whole creativity part, here and developing and being better in competition. Here, what you'll find here. Who remembers the diagram? What do you find here? Come on. Doing things fast. Okay, that was this one. This is actually doing things right and the control, and this is basically connecting with others. So actually, this diagram is a worked through original framework of competing values framework, kind of taking to the next level. So the two should be read together in order to make sense of them. Does it make sense? And the last way of reading it, by the way, and I move on, is actually each of the opposites should be read in parallel. So, for example, life balance should be read in a parallel with full engagement. And it's a question of keeping things in balance. So keeping things in balance between engagement and life balance. So which is basically keeping things in balance between engagement and well-being. Too much well-being, withdrawal. Too much engagement, exhaustion, as we've seen in the original quadrant. The same cost control goes against growth focus. Too much growth focus to waste, too much control austerity. Again, so it's balancing between the opposites, as another way of reading it. So this for me, by the way, actually, whenever you're doing leadership programs, leadership development programs, management development programs, is probably one of the really good tools to include, both in terms of enhancing one's awareness, and also in terms of, again, looking at it from the complementary standpoint. It's not necessarily that your leader has to absolutely do everything, but maybe if their strengths are much more in the creativity domain, encouraging creative action, self-organization, intrinsic motivation, maybe they need to be counterbalanced by somebody who is a little bit better in good sort of old procedures and making sure things are, well, some people are smiling, so, and making sure things are there under control a little bit. So it's not necessarily developing all of it in one individual, but making sure at the level of the management team there is complementarity of profiles. Okay, so I've been talking quite a lot actually, a bit more than 45 minutes. So I'm going to come to the end of this presentation, hopefully give you a little bit of a scope, some ideas, not all answers of course, some ideas, something new, something different you haven't seen. So I would like to say thank you, and then we'll talk a bit with questions. So thank you. And so some people who need to run, you can run, and some people who want to talk, you can stay.
So I have to have the microphone. If you have questions, anyone, raise your hand and I will come running with the microphone.
Or maybe not. No questions? You all agree? Is everything? Great. Well, okay, then let's stop here, and if you want some questions, you can have them over a cup of coffee. So have a good working day, and I hope it does get a little bit brighter soon.